Hostess looked me up and down and said, "I'm sorry, sir. Are you on the list?" I was standing at the front door of a house I had paid for, not metaphorically, not partially. I had written the check that made that house possible, and a 20-something woman with a clipboard was asking me if I was on the list. I said, "I'm the groom's father." She scrolled through her clipboard, ran her finger down the page twice, and said, "I don't see you here. Let me go find someone." And right there, standing on that porch, I knew. I didn't know everything, not yet, but I knew enough. Something in my chest went very quiet, the way it does right before something breaks. My name is Arthur. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a machinist at a manufacturing plant in central Ohio. The kind of job that leaves your hands rough and your back permanently sore, but puts food on the table and money in the bank if you're careful enough. I was always careful. My wife Helen was careful too. We didn't take vacations to Hawaii. We didn't drive new cars. We brought our lunches to work and paid off our mortgage 11 years early and put a little away every month because we always believed that the point of working hard wasn't just survival. It was so that someday the people you loved wouldn't have to struggle the way you did. Helen passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 17 months from diagnosis to the end. I was with her every single day. After she was gone, I went back to work for another 2 years, mostly because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And then I retired at 61 with a pension, a paid-off house, and a savings account that Helen and I had built together over 3 decades. It wasn't a fortune, but it was real. It was ours, my son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is. Whatever else has happened, his name is Kevin. He's 34. He works in software sales and makes considerably more money than I ever did, which I was always proud of. I thought we did something right, Helen and I, raising a boy who went to college on partial scholarship, worked his way up, made something of himself. I was proud every time I told people what he did for a living. Kevin met his wife Brianna about 5 years ago. She's from the Pacific Northwest, comes from a family with a different relationship to money than we had. Her father works in commercial real estate. Her mother does something in finance. They have a vacation home on the Oregon coast. Nice people, from what I could tell in the limited contact I had with them. Kevin and Brianna got married 3 years ago in a ceremony in Portland, which I attended, flew out for, sat in the front row, and watched my son marry a woman who I genuinely thought I was going to have a good relationship with. It didn't quite work out that way. After the wedding, things got cordial but distant. They lived in Seattle. I was in Ohio. Kevin called on birthdays and holidays, sometimes in between, but it was the kind of calling that felt more like maintenance than connection. Brianna was always polite when I visited, but there was a warmth missing that I couldn't quite name. I told myself it was just the adjustment period, just a natural distance that comes when your child builds a life far away. I told myself a lot of things. About 18 months ago, Kevin called me on a Sunday night and said he had something important to talk about. He and Brianna had found a house they loved in a suburb east of Seattle. 4 bedrooms, good school district, exactly what they'd been looking for. The problem was the down payment. In a Seattle market, they were looking at needing somewhere around $95,000 to get into the home they wanted at a payment they could manage. They had $40,000 saved. They were $55,000 short. He wanted to know if I could help. I want to be honest about my first reaction, because I think it matters. My first reaction was not hesitation. My first reaction was yes, immediately and without reservation, yes, because that's what Helen and I had saved for, in the back of our minds, in the part we never said out loud but both understood. It was for this, for the moment when our son needed a real foundation and we could help him build it. Helen never got to see Kevin get married. She never met Brianna. She never got to see any of this. But I thought, sitting in the kitchen of our paid-off house in Ohio, that helping Kevin buy his first home was something Helen would have wanted, something she would have done without blinking. I said yes. I said yes with one condition, and I want to be very clear about this. It was not a demand. It was not a hostile act. It was just me being the careful, practical person I had always been. I said I needed us to put it in writing as a loan, not because I expected conflict, not because I didn't trust my son, but because $55,000 is a significant amount of money, and I had spent my whole life knowing that handshake deals between family members are where a lot of permanent damage gets done. I'd seen it happen to my own father with his brother years ago. I didn't want that for us. Kevin agreed without any argument. We drew up a simple promissory note. I had a notary in town help me with the language, stating that I was lending Kevin and Brianna $55,000, interest-free, to be repaid over 10 years at $448 per month. First payment, due 6 months after closing to give them time to settle in. Kevin signed it. Brianna signed it. I wired the money the following week. They closed on the house in March. The housewarming party was in June. I drove to the airport at 4 in the morning to catch my flight. I'd bought a card, put $200 cash in it as an additional gift, packed a weekend bag. I was excited, genuinely. I wanted to see the house. I wanted to see my son. I hadn't been to Seattle in almost a year, and I was looking forward to it the way you look forward to things when you live alone, and the quiet of your house sometimes weighs on you more than you'd like to admit. When the Uber dropped me off, I could hear the party already in progress inside. Music, laughter, the hum of a crowd. It was a nice street. The house looked exactly like the photos Kevin had sent, craftsman style, well-maintained neighborhood, big maple tree in the front yard. I stood on the porch for a moment just looking at it and thinking about Helen, the way I do when something good happens. This habit I can't seem to break of turning to the left to say something to someone who isn't there anymore. Then I rang the doorbell. The young woman with the clipboard answered. She was friendly enough. She explained that Brianna had organized a guest list for catering purposes, and she just needed to confirm names. She scrolled, she looked, she apologized, and she went to find Kevin. Kevin came to the door looking flustered. He hugged me, said of course I was welcome, told the hostess to mark me down, and led me inside. He didn't say anything about my name not being on the list. He acted like it was a minor administrative mix-up, a small oversight, nothing worth discussing. I let it go. I told myself it was an accident. The house was beautiful. I'll give them that. They'd done real work on it. New paint throughout, refinished hardwood floors, a kitchen renovation that was tasteful and well executed. Brianna came over and greeted me with a hug that lasted approximately 1 second, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She said she was glad I could make it, gestured vaguely toward the food table, and was absorbed back into the party before I could say anything more than thank you. I found a spot near the windows and watched my son work the room. He was good at it. He always had been. He moved from group to group, laughing easily, relaxed in a way he never quite was when it was just the two of us. Brianna's parents were there. I recognized her father from the wedding, a tall man named something I never quite caught, who had one of those confident handshakes that communicates wealth before a single word is spoken. He was holding court near the fireplace. People kept going over to him. After about an hour, Brianna clinked a glass and called for attention. She wanted to say a few words, she said. She was so grateful everyone had come. She was so happy in this home. She and Kevin had worked so hard to get here. And then she turned to her parents, and her voice changed, got softer and more genuine, the way voices do when something actually means something, and she said that none of this would have been possible without them. She said her parents' generosity had made this house a reality. She said they had contributed to making this dream come true, and she wanted everyone to know how grateful she was for their support. Her parents had contributed $20,000 toward the furniture and appliances. I had contributed $55,000 toward the house existing. She did not say my name. Not once, not in passing, not even a general thank you to both families. I stood by the window with a glass of water in my hand and waited. I counted to 10. I waited some more. She finished her remarks. People applauded. Her father looked proud. And I kept waiting for something. A footnote. A quick addition. Oh. And of course Arthur, Kevin's dad. But it never came. Kevin was clapping too. He was smiling. He caught my eye for just a moment and then looked away. That was the moment. Not the clipboard at the door. Not the 1-second hug. That look away. That small, deliberate turning of his face, that's what I keep coming back to, even now. Because it told me everything. He knew exactly what had just happened. He had watched his wife stand in the house that my money had helped purchase and thank her parents by name and not mention me, and he had made a choice, not an accident, a choice, I stayed for another 40 minutes because I didn't know how to leave gracefully any sooner. I ate some food I couldn't taste. I talked to a couple of their neighbors who were friendly. I looked at the refinished floors in the new kitchen, and I did the math in my head the way you can't stop yourself from doing $55,000 plus the flight out here, plus the hotel tonight, because Brianna had mentioned they had a full house with her family staying over, so I'd booked myself a room nearby, plus the $200 in the card in my jacket pocket that I never ended up giving anyone. Before I left, I found Kevin alone for a moment in the hallway. I said, "It's a really beautiful house." He said, "Thanks, Dad. We're really happy here." I said, "I'm glad." And then I paused and I said, "I noticed Brianna's speech." He looked at me. Not guilty, something worse. He looked tired. Like this was a conversation he had already had with himself and settled. He said, "Dad, she was just speaking off the cuff. It wasn't meant to be anything." I said, "Okay." And I left. I took a cab to my hotel and sat on the edge of the bed in my travel clothes and looked at the wall for a while. I didn't cry. I was past the crying age from most things, or maybe I'd used up a lot of that capacity in the 17 months I watched Helen get smaller and smaller. What I felt instead was a kind of clarity, the particular clearness that comes when you've been telling yourself a story about a situation, and the situation finally shows you, plainly and without ambiguity, that the story was wrong. I called my brother Dennis in Columbus. Dennis is the practical one in the family. Always has been. He listened without interrupting while I told him everything. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said, "Arthur, you have a signed promissory note?" I said yes. He said, "Then you have options. I want to be fair here and say that I didn't make any decisions that night." I flew home the next morning. I went back to my regular life. The quiet house, the walks, the Tuesday night card game with 3 other retired guys from the plant, the weekends I was slowly learning to fill with something other than waiting. I thought about it for 6 weeks. I called Kevin once, about 2 weeks after the party, and had a normal conversation about nothing in particular, and he didn't bring up what had happened, and neither did I. And when I hung up the phone, I sat there for a long time and understood that he was never going to bring it up. He had decided to simply let it go, to let the silence settle over it like it hadn't happened. And for my son to be at peace with that, I had to face what that actually meant about where things stood between us. I talked to an attorney in Columbus who handled civil matters. A straightforward case, she told me. The promissory note was valid and properly executed. Kevin had not missed any payments. He'd been making his monthly installments reliably. I want to be clear about that. But that wasn't the issue I was there to discuss. The issue I was there to discuss was something I'd been turning over since that night in the hotel room. I wanted to formally request early repayment of the remaining balance. Under the terms of the note, I had the legal right to call the loan due in full with 90 days' notice if I could demonstrate material change in my financial circumstances. I had recently been informed, and this was the truth, not a fabrication, that my roof needed to be fully replaced, a cost of roughly $18,000, and I had a dental situation that required 2 implants, and I was looking at some deferred maintenance on the house. The financial need was genuine, but I want to be honest. The letter I asked my attorney to draft was not purely about the roof. It was about the fact that I had been erased. It was about the fact that my son had looked away. It was about the fact that when you give someone the foundation of their life and they stand in that house and let your name go unspoken, something has to be said eventually, and I no longer trusted that words alone would say it. The attorney sent the letter in September. Certified mail. Kevin called me that same evening, about 2 hours after he must have received it. He wasn't angry the way I'd half expected. He was quiet. He said, "Dad, is this really necessary?" I said, "I need the money, Kevin." "The note is clear." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Can we talk about this?" I said, "Of course," and I meant it. I was not trying to destroy my relationship with my son. I was not trying to punish Brianna. Not exactly. I was trying, in the only language that had ever seemed to land in that household, to communicate that what had happened mattered. We talked 3 more times over the following weeks. In the second conversation, Brianna was present and her voice was cold in the way that told me she had decided I was the problem in this situation, which I had expected. In the third conversation, Kevin said something I've held on to because it was the first genuinely honest thing he'd said to me since the party. He said, "Dad, I think I let you down that day and I didn't handle it right afterward." He didn't say more than that, and he didn't apologize, exactly, but it was something. It was the beginning of something anyway. They paid the remaining balance, just under $39,000 at that point, in a lump sum in November. Kevin had borrowed against his 401k, and Brianna's parents contributed some portion. I don't know how much or under what circumstances, and I didn't ask. The money arrived in my account on a Tuesday. I stared at the deposit notification on my phone for a long time. I had not planned what I was going to do with it. But over the fall, while all of this was unfolding, I had found myself thinking about a trip Helen and I had talked about for years and never taken. She had wanted to go to Ireland. Her grandmother was from County Clare and she'd always wanted to see where that part of the family came from. We'd said next year for about 15 years running, and then next year stopped coming. I booked the trip in December. 2 weeks, Dublin, Galway, the cliffs of Moher, a few days in County Clare. I went in April, just me and a rental car, and a road atlas and a folder of notes I'd made over the winter about towns and graveyards and a church in a small village where Helen's grandmother had been baptized. I'm not a sentimental man generally. Or maybe I am, and I just spent most of my life in circumstances that didn't leave room for it. But on the 4th day, I parked on a pull-off above the Atlantic coast, wind coming off the water hard enough to make my eyes water, and I stood there looking out at the gray-green ocean, and I talked to Helen for the first time since the funeral, in a way that felt real rather than ceremonial. I told her about Kevin. I told her what had happened. I told her I didn't know if I'd handled it right. I told her I missed her in a way that still surprised me sometimes with its weight 4 years in. Then I got back in the car and drove to County Clare. Kevin and I talk more now than we did before. Not the maintenance calls, something more. He came to Ohio in February with Brianna, and they stayed at my house for 4 days, the longest stretch we'd spent together in years. It wasn't easy. There were silences and some stiffness around the edges, but there were also good moments. We watched a game together. He helped me with some work in the garage. Brianna made dinner one evening, and it was actually very good, and I told her so, and she looked surprised, like she hadn't expected a compliment from me. I don't know where things go from here. I don't know what the next years look like, whether we find our way to something real or whether we stay in this careful, managed version of a relationship. I know that when Kevin turns to me now when something happens in his life, good or bad, there's something more present in it than there was, whether that's because of what I did, or in spite of it, or just the passage of time doing what time does. I can't say. What I know is this. Helen and I spent 31 years building something. We built it carefully and without shortcuts, and we never asked for much acknowledgement beyond the quiet knowledge that we'd done right by our family. That was enough for a long time. Maybe it should have been enough forever. But I am 63 years old, and I live alone in a house that is very quiet in the evenings. And I have earned the right, I think, to ask for a little recognition. Not praise, not monuments, just a name, spoken out loud, in a room full of people, in a house that exists because of what I gave. I asked for it the only way I knew how, and then I went to Ireland. I keep thinking about that moment in the hotel room, sitting on the edge of the bed in my travel clothes, the party still technically going on a few miles away, my son in that beautiful house with the refinished floors that my money helped make possible. Not anger exactly, just a very still, very clear kind of knowing. There's a version of this story where I say nothing, where I swallow it, go home, keep making polite calls on holidays and tell myself that the important thing is that Kevin is happy and the money doesn't matter. I understand that version. I was close to choosing it. But I've lived long enough to know that the things we don't say don't disappear. They just change shape. They become distance. They become a relationship that functions but doesn't breathe. What I did wasn't complicated, and it wasn't cruel. I had a piece of paper with 2 signatures on it, and I used it. That's not revenge. That's just a man who spent 31 years learning that the world responds to clarity more reliably than it responds to silence. Helen used to say that the hardest thing about loving people is that you can't make them see you. You can show up, give everything, be present for every hard thing, and still some people will look right past you because they've already decided where you fit in their story. She was talking about her own mother when she said that. But I've thought about it 100 times since the housewarming. You can't make someone see you. But you don't have to keep arranging your life around their blindness either. I think about what it takes to actually build something. A marriage, a savings account, a life with any dignity in it. It's not one big dramatic choice. It's 1,000 small ones, most of them unglamorous. It's the lunch you pack instead of buying. It's the Saturday you spend fixing something yourself instead of calling someone. It's knowing the difference between what you want right now and what you'll need later. Kevin grew up watching me make those choices. I thought he understood what they added up to. Maybe he does now, more than he did. There's something I've had to be honest with myself about. I made mistakes too. I didn't ask enough questions when Kevin first brought up the loan. I didn't have a direct conversation about expectations, not about repayment terms, but about the simpler human thing, about what it would mean to me to be acknowledged. I assumed he knew. Assuming is a way of avoiding the harder conversation, and I was guilty of it. That's on me. What I know is that the trip to Ireland did something for me that the lawsuit never could have. Standing above the Atlantic in County Clare, talking to Helen in the wind. That was the part that actually settled something. The legal resolution closed a financial chapter. The trip closed something older and quieter. Grief has its own timeline, and it doesn't care about promissory notes. Kevin and I are still figuring out what we are to each other. It's slow work. But I'd rather do the slow work honestly than keep up the easier pretense. That's the only version of this I can live with. Not the one where I win, but the one where I'm still standing in it. Still willing to try. Still my actual self. That's what Helen would have wanted. I think that's what I want too.